Talking about Justin Jefferson, Jordan Hicks, and just about anything else I can think of that I saw on tape here. It's a film review kind of Wednesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Ooh-wee!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings, and thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. So today I want to talk about a few things in particular. I want to talk about Justin Jefferson a little bit. I want to talk about Jordan Hicks a little bit. And then I want to talk about busts, coverage busts, protection busts, miscommunications, and things and stuff like that. Before I get into that, two of those three topics are going to be fairly negative, but don't mistake that for me secretly thinking the Vikings were bad or anything like that. It's just that two of the things that interested me the most happened to be not as good, but the Vikings played very well. They got a lot of push in the run game. The coverage was excellent. Justin Jefferson, you know about him. Kirk Cousins had a great day. There's a lot more good than bad. I just think the bad stuff's a little bit more curiosity inspiring. So that's how it happens to go, but don't mistake that for like negativity. But let's start with the most outrageously positive thing, which is Justin Jefferson, because holy crap, right? Today I want to talk about his craft. We've talked a lot about how the Vikings have gotten him open, choice routes and motion across the formation or routes across the formation. If you've missed some of those conversations, the long and short of it is a lot of modern defenses exist in a world where in a split field world, which means one side of the play will have one coverage call and the other side of the play will have another coverage call. And it gives defenses a lot of flexibility. It's a little more nimble and everybody does a lot of this. The Packers in this game had a lot of trouble when Justin Jefferson went from one side of the field with one coverage call into the other side. Coverage calls can be stressed a lot when they have to, in the middle of the play, account for another player that they didn't have to account for pre-snap, and the Packers really struggled with that. They did a very bad job. They busted a lot of coverages. That was part of it. Part of that is motion, which is kind of the same stress, but pre-snap. And part of that is just Justin Jefferson being really good at football. So let's talk about that third one a little bit. If you would like to know more about that first and second one, check out Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. Decent chance that by the time you listen to this, it will be available for everybody. But if it is not yet, it's currently only available to patrons, but it'll be made available to everybody when I wake up on Wednesday. So I'm recording this the night before. So good chance that you can see it. If not, you should be able to see it soon enough. If you are not a patron or just become a patron, I would love that. But that goes over a lot more of the scheme stuff. And I'm going to kind of save that conversation for there. But for Jefferson himself, I don't talk a lot about like his craft in that one. I'll talk about a couple of routes of his. There's also an article at Zone Coverage that goes over a lot of the same things. But what was cool about his craft is a lot of these moves, a lot of his routes and the nuances of it are very subtle. And that's not necessarily like here nor there. A small move takes less time, but it might not be as, it might need to be more pronounced to get them to bite on it or whatever. But with Jefferson, it's a lot like the goal is to not slow down, not necessarily to be small. Being small is a way to add extra fluff to your routes without slowing down the timing of that route. And I'm actually going to harken back to, you might remember the last game of 2018, week 17, game against the Bears, winning in, and they didn't win it. And that was the game where Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen argued on the sideline infamously. And if you read Cousins' lips, what he was saying is, I don't have 10 seconds. I don't have 10 seconds. What he was angry about, or at least his side of that argument, was Adam Thielen was taking too long, adding too many little bells and whistles to his routes, and it was messing up the timing of the play. And Thielen basically said, yeah, that's what I do. And it's your job to kind of accommodate that. And that was the argument, right? Jefferson is skirting around this by his moves are a lot more subtle than Thielen's were in that 2018 year, where he was doing so much and it was getting open all the time. But yeah, sometimes it would take too long, right? Um, Jefferson is keeping everything as subtle as it has to be so he can still be where he's supposed to be on time, but there's still deception to it. And it's the subtlety, there's a flexibility to it. There's a very specific kind of athleticism that requires. And there is a lot of, like, it's such a diverse toolkit. This dude's in year 3 and he's got about 10 years worth of route running in him. It's unbelievable. It's what makes me so excited for just how far Justin Jefferson can rise, because there's that much to it. And then on top of it, the actual just God-given talent that he has, but he's just such a subtle and nuanced player. There's so many little layers to everything going on. It's like watching a great movie that for the 5th time, and everybody has that movie they love so much that they catch a new thing every time they watch it. Jefferson routes are like that. That's why I've been calling them art. They push the boundary of what routes can be and just how much you can cram in there while still keeping the skeleton of the route the way it's supposed to be for the play design. It's unbelievably cool. And so let's go over some examples. A lot of this happens at the release. And one of his favorite releases is a little hop step release. It's not a hezzy release. That's a different thing, although he does use that. But they'll use a little hop step. It's like a little skip. And you skip into this is against, like, not super jammed press, but it's against like soft press or like passive press, where they're lined up, a yard or two off the ball, but they aren't jamming you. And the hop step is a great way to eat up whatever little cushion they have. So you are right in their face when you're actually doing your release, and they don't have any room to work with at all. And that's really no margin of error for a corner. And you still haven't revealed anything because of that hop step, right? Because if you're that little skips, if you just take a step, which foot you step forward with first or whatever can reveal information. It can give things. If you lean a direction one way or another, it can give things to the corner, but that little hop step doesn't. That little hop step keeps you hidden. So it kind of delays any declaration of what you're going to do until you're right in their face, and then it can get a lot easier to release inside or outside of them. Another favorite of his is just the subtlest little lean off course, especially down the field. When you're down the field, when you're 15, 20 yards down the field, you're not as often coming to a full stop and trying to break on a dime. A lot of those routes, the deep post kind of routes or deep corners, a lot of times it's okay to round those off because you're just trying to get to a spot really quickly, and it's a lot more about being fast once you're that deep. And so that tiny little lean kind of looks like it should look if you're going to try to feign like an outside corner, and then you're actually breaking inside. And he can find safety blind spots that way. This is a big route running thing. At a certain point, the corner is going to have to turn his hips and start running with you. If you can force him to do that too early, which you'll do by scaring him, basically. If you can threaten him enough where he does that early, you'll be running behind him, and he doesn't have eyes in the back of his head. And so now you're in a blind spot, and you can break away, and that's when some of the best routes happen. That's when some of the best, like, highlight reel separations, the broadcast is going to get that. And Jefferson got one on the big 64-yarder. Jefferson did that to Darnell Savage. It was gorgeous. I could talk about this for hours. But I do want to get to Jordan Hicks and some of the other things. So responsibly, let me talk to you about LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is a great place to find somebody to fill that new position. It's kind of hiring season. Fall is when this happens. And if you have a job opening and you're looking for the right people, you have to incorporate LinkedIn into your hiring process. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. It's a professional network of over 810 million people on LinkedIn. Crazy. And they've got simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates that fit you and your company and your culture and what you need for the job. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? and you can post your job for free there at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Hey, check out patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. It's my Patreon. I am going to fill it with a ton of film stuff this season. A lot of in-depth versions of what I've been talking about. If you are listening to this show and you wish you had visuals, if you're watching the show on YouTube and you wish you had tape, the Locked On Vikings YouTube channel won't be able to have tape, but my Patreon can. So go check that out. I would love it if you join me there. You can also find the history documentary, a 7-part, 7-hour documentary series on the history of the Minnesota Vikings. You can sit down and binge it for a whole Saturday, or you can watch one a week. It'll all be great. I worked very hard on that this offseason, so I would love it if you checked it out. Let's talk a little bit about Jordan Hicks. So the Jordan Hicks problem. Wednesday is the day where I sort of revisit stuff that I said immediately after the game, like in the Monday episode or in the postcast with Sam Ekstrom or the Minnesota football party with Sam and Arif and Luke Inman. And this is my chance to kind of walk stuff back or correct myself, or, hey, I looked at it and it's actually not the case and all that stuff. When it comes to the Jordan Hicks thing, I am pretty much confirmed what I thought I saw right off the bat, that Jordan Hicks was very slow to the flat, and there were like 5 or 6 plays that the Packers got, either toss plays to the outside or play action, swing passes, that kind of thing, that turned into some of their biggest chunk gains just by throwing a bubble and going to the flat and making Jordan Hicks be the guy that had to get all the way from an A gap to the numbers 5 yards down the field and beat Aaron Jones to that spot or AJ Dillon to that spot. And he just couldn't do it. He was just a little late every time. You get the tackle and it'd be a 9-10 yard gain. And the Packers could kind of do that all the way down the field. And a couple of the couple of drives that they did get that ended up being, fourth down stops, they went that way. So that's a concern, and I don't know if there's anything you can do about it. And I don't know if there's anything you should do about it, because what I noticed on the rewatch with Jordan Hicks, I'm going to do a Patreon on Jordan Hicks, and I'm going to kind of do the good and the bad of him. And the good cut up was a lot longer than I thought it would be. There were a lot of really good moments. There's a lot of really good physical moments. And he played like his size is. And it's weird. In Arizona, I remember watching that tape and being like, this guy plays a lot rangier than he is. Because he's like a big linebacker and he wasn't particularly fast, but he plays with a lot of range. And some of that's just reading stuff really fast. And maybe you get a little more comfortable with that as the season wears on. You could hope. But here, right now, he plays like a big, slow linebacker. He's hard to move. He can deconstruct blocks really well. He can fill a gap. He can hold his spot. But when his range was tested, he struggled. That's the Jordan Hicks experience here. And it kind of leads me to a greater question about the run game and the run defense. A lot of people were like, wait, is this the Achilles heel? Do they not have a run defense? Some of this was seeded schematically just by like box counts. By just like they were not gapped out. And what gapped out means is a guy in every gap, and they were not. And a good running back can find that and get bigger gains. But another part of that too is if you're gapped out, you kind of can't make a mistake. A mistake versus like a Zimmer defense, when he would be loading the box, or he would have Harrison Smith in the box or something like that. Then a good run gets 4 or 5, and you're happy with 4 or 5. But that same play against this defense is gonna get 7 or 8. And you're getting something for that. That's the cost. And the benefit is you get a lot more range out of Harrison Smith, a lot more range out of Cam Bynum, versatility. And that the broadcast made a huge deal out of it. If you watch the game on TV, that umbrella coverage thing that seemed to really stymie the Packers is what you get in return. It is absolutely a worthy trade. I would make it every time. And, this was a game where they gave up a whole bunch of run production and then also 7 points, including a couple of fourth down stops. But even if those were normally handled, you're talking 13 points if they kick them both, 17 if they make a touchdown and kick one. I mean, it was a good defensive performance. And the Packers didn't have any way to pay off that run production. Um, usually you run the ball well and then you can hit them with a play action fake, but the Vikings didn't really respond to stop those 7-yard gains. They just kept safeties up on the roof, and that's what they're going to do. The safeties always will exist on the roof every single time. If they start putting a safety in the box, they've lost their identity. That I know the analytics crowds likes that a lot because oh yeah, they're prioritizing the pass over the run, and yeah, and I think all of the internal team models probably found the same thing. But it's also the illusion of complexity. Like there's more X's and O's reasons to do that. They're not just doing it because of like a ratio, but that is the season I think we're going to have. I think you're going to have games where, oh my God, they ran for a $180 on you. But how much production did that actually set up? How much pass production did that actually set up? Or is it the kind of thing where they ran for a $180 on you, and with a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter, that running game didn't really count for much, winning games the way Zimmer lost them a lot, honestly. And that it sort of extrapolates past Jordan Hicks. But Jordan Hicks physically, when the run came his way on the inside, I thought he did really well. The Danielle Hunter Zadarius Smith combo struggled on the edge a little bit in run defense too. That was part of it. I'm not too worried about it. But again, a big part of it is that those guys were put in bad positions by the scheme on purpose because it made pass rush easier, like the way that the fronts that they deployed and stuff like that. So I'm super not panicking about the run defense. I'm a little concerned about Jordan Hicks. Yeah, for sure. I don't see that problem fixing itself because it's one of like just pure athleticism. And so unless he can get faster overnight, like that's a thing on tape that other teams are going to probably be able to exploit. And I think the way to fix it is get Brian Asamoah ready. But I don't think that can happen this year. Gosh, I would be surprised if Brian Asamoah came in, but that would be the way to improve on this. Otherwise, it's just a thing you got to live with. They're just going to give up some plays in the flats this year. Packers put it on tape, and then that's going to happen. Here's the thing they need to fix. I don't think they need to fix it. I can live with that. Here's the thing they need to fix: the busts, the miscommunications, the problems. This is the first game stuff that I was so worried about coming into the game. Didn't sink them like I thought it would, but it did exist. So I'm going to try to explain some of it to you. And it's all stuff that can be fixed with a conversation on the sideline. But it's still interesting enough to me to dive into and say, okay, what exactly happened here? And I think that's a really good way to learn about what they actually do by explaining when somebody does it wrong. And the fix for all of it is talk it out and figure out a way to communicate better. Before I get into that, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. BetOnline is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling. All right, so if you want to go bet on the game, bet on that Vikings-Eagles game Monday night coming up. You can find it at BetOnline. You can bet on spread, over/under. You can build all sorts of player props. You can parlay a bunch together. You can even bet right in the middle of the game if you wanted to. You can bet on that. You can bet on tennis, MMA, golf, baseball, basketball. At least WNBA's in their finals right now. You can bet on anything. You can find all of that at betonline.net, where the game starts. Okay, let's talk about these miscommunications. I'm just going to start listing them, and we'll see kind of how many I can cram in here. But there were too many of these, and it needs to get cleaned up. This is the thing that can sink the Vikings in future games, and that the Packers did not punish it is on them. And lucky us. Now we get to fix it in a dub. We love that. But I guess I'll start with the one that's top of mind because I just did the Justin Jefferson video and it's in there. It's the swing pass to Justin Jefferson that was on 3rd and 14 that barely got back to the line of scrimmage because I think it was Rasul Douglas came in and got the ankle tackle. Cousins under immediate pressure, and you're going, what happened there? Well, on the all-22, Garrett Bradbury ran the wrong way. Bradbury had a very bad game. There were like 7 or 8 really bad plays. This was one of them. A couple of bad pressures, a couple of bad whiffs in the run game. A couple of times where guys had to save him. They did a better job of hiding him than I think they've ever done, which is nice. And so you can live like that. if they do want to go a different direction on center, I maintain I don't think that guy's on the roster. But that doesn't mean you can't go find somebody if you wanted to do that. Also, on I think both offense and defense, there were delay of game issues, and I believe they were both related to substitutions. There was or procedural penalty issues because one was an offsides penalty, and then there was the delay of game penalty on 2nd and 11. I believe that was also like not getting the right personnel on the sideline, and stuff was going wrong, and the play clock went too far down. The second one was on defense. They were trying to get a substitution in. So I have to assume that the delay of game in the first one on offense that brought them from 2nd and 11 to 2nd and 16 was legit. The defensive one, I don't think should have been called because the Packers weren't set. The Packers went no huddle. One of the wide receivers did not get set, and then they snapped it. And they snapped it and called offsides because the 12th man running off the field was running on the wrong side of the line of scrimmage, but he would have been called for 12 anyways, and they're both 5-yard penalties. So the name of it doesn't matter. The point is the guy didn't get off the field in time, and that was a problem. But the Packers weren't set. So when you do no huddle, you have to sit there frozen for 1 second, one Mississippi. And the Packers did not do that. If they had done that, the Viking player would have gotten off just fine. So the Vikings did that in a way that should not have been penalized and was not too slow. The Packers snapped before they should have, and the refs missed it. So that was a missed call, and I wouldn't go say, oh, we messed up a substitution. That's what I'm going to be. I'm not like complaining about the refs here. I'm saying like in an internal sense, you're not going back into the meeting room and saying, oh, we messed up a substitution. We have to fix that. I don't think you have to fix that. I think you got unlucky. So there's a couple of there. And then there's the coverage busts. This will be another Patreon thing where I'll go in with the visuals and go in a little more depth. But let me just talk real quick about the way quarter, half coverages work like internally. So when I say quarter, half, that means one side of the field is quarters. And that side of the field works really similarly to what we've been watching with Zimmer for the last 3 years, 2-3 years, since 4, I guess, since 2018, since that Rams game that you all remember with Jared Goff throwing all over the Vikings. They came back in that game running Saban-style quarters. Pat Narduzzi at Michigan State was the guy that really inspired that. And I actually do think that the Kirk connection was part of that too. But that's what they've been running. So the quarters side works a lot like that often. And if you're unfamiliar, it's crazy complicated, but it's basically a set of rules. Now, the way Zimmer ran it was man match. So you would have, all right, I take the number 2 unless he goes deep, then I'll pass the number 2 on to you, but whoever has him is tight to him and is playing him man to man. This scheme uses zone match, which is a little bit more outside, inside, a little bit more about I've got, from this hash to the number and from this yard line to that yard line. But when you're in my zone, I'm playing you, not flat-footed watching the quarterback. That's the biggest difference. So in quarters, whether it's zone or man match, there is that initial structure of the play, and then there are adjustments that can be made. I still know the Saban-y words for them, and I'm sure that they have different words with the Vikings, but I'll use the vocab I know. But stuff like an undercall, a smash call, an out call, a push call, all of those calls are something that the player has leeway to do in the middle of the rep to essentially adjust the coverage. And they can either call it out, or if you're really onto it, both players will just know what stimuli make that call happen and what don't, so you can do it non-verbally. You don't have to say anything. You just, okay, I know that this is going to switch because that receiver did what he was supposed to do to trigger it. And that was the source, I think, of a lot of the coverage busting. I think a lot of it was centered around Chandon Sullivan, particularly not doing that, although it's really hard to say that it was his fault. He was involved in all of them, but he might have been right, and it might have just been the other guy in bad luck, right? I can't say. You can never really know what they're supposed to be doing. But I'll give you one example. The Romeo Dobbs, I believe it was the 2nd and 19, big wide open Romeo Dobbs. How did he get that open? And it looked like Patrick Peterson was chasing it, right? So they were in, that was the half side of quarter half. So you've got one deep safety and you've got 3 players underneath because it was on the passing strength in empty. They have 3 receivers versus 3 underneath defenders and a safety over the top. And one of those receivers runs an under, like a shallow cross, and the other one runs a corner. Old guys call this 72. Kurt Warner called it 72 when he was breaking down Vikings tape before the season of Clint Kubiak's offense, because Clint Kubiak used it a lot. But it's, call it smash, call it under, corner, who cares? So the Vikings could make a call there that says, okay, usually I would carry this number 1 across the field. This would be Patrick Peterson saying this. Usually I carry this number 1 receiver across the field. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to call under because he's running an under. So I call under, yell out under, whatever my word for it is. And now Chandon Sullivan picks him up, and I will back off into a deep quarter zone. And I'll take that corner route that comes to get it. And so you change that, whereas usually both those guys would have to be man, and now I'm chasing a shallow cross, and now Chandon Sullivan has to take a corner route, and that's kind of difficult. And is the safety going to be able to help, or how does that work? It just switches everything around on a dime, right? The problem is if one player makes that call and the other doesn't hear it, or vice versa, if a player hears a call that nobody made, you're going to end up with 2 guys doing the same job and nobody doing another job. And that's what happened on all of those busts. I believe it was all about those adjustments and getting those down. So it's on field, in the heat of the moment communication, where you just have to kind of say, okay, we got to know when we're doing this and when we're not doing this, and we got to be more consistent about not messing that up. It's the kind of thing you're going to deal with learning a new defense. This is the kind of stuff I talked about. Going to take some time to iron it out, but those are kinks to iron out. I think the bottom line here, before we sort of put this game to bed and transition into Eagles mode, is that this was a really, really positive debut. Don't let that get lost in the sauce of all the negative things that I talked about today. The problems that I talked about today are either stuff you can live with, stuff that only comes up once or twice a game, or stuff that is easy enough to fix and you would expect it to get fixed over the course of the year. It's all stuff that you're talking about in November usually. Where they're at right now is way ahead of where I thought they would be. And if these are the problems, like, you can tell, probably, I'm working pretty hard to find nitpicks, right? And if I have to work that hard, that's a really good thing. So if I'm going to zoom this way out, Vikings are doing great off this first game. Let's see if they keep it up, right? You know, one game's only one game, and you can never get too big for your britches. But it was a great debut. And they head into this Eagles game feeling good, and I think they deserve to, and we'll see if they can keep it up. Eagles are a good team, and tomorrow we're going to do a crossover with Locked On Eagles, so I look forward. I have a whole bunch of questions for them. I don't know the Eagles very well at all, so I'm going to hopefully try to get to know them, and then Friday we'll talk about it. We're also going to do Twitter Monday this week because they play on Monday night, so I won't have a game to recap, and then instead of doing Twitter Tuesday, I'll recap the game on Tuesday. So that's going to be how that works. It's next few days of the show. Check out my Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Check out the Peacock and Williamson show. It's another Locked On property with Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson breaking down the NFL from the national perspective. Great stuff over there. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.